Scott, you might not know this, but Terry also ran Marvel Comics for a while. Did you know that?
I did know that. I did a little
research
bit about this guy.
Okay.
That was my worst rock and roll failure. You know why?
Why is that?
Well, the history of comic books is since Stan came along and created the characters in the early '60s, nothing's ever really worked except superheroes. I mean, you have all the independents, the dark horses that have created movies like Men in Black, and so that stuff works, but not on a large scale. And so when you're charged with running a company like that, and you're working for a guy like Ronald Perlman, and it's called earnings per share, and so you do the easy things first. You raise the prices, then you raise the number of books you put out, and then you got to figure out, can you put other kinds of books out? And so I foolishly thought that maybe we could do rock and roll comic books, because there's so many rock groups and artists that like comic books. And I found a bunch of them, and so I would get a deal with them to do a comic book about them, because they always want to be in a comic book.
Right.
But the problem is the comic book stores did not see that as something they thought was going to have a broad enough. So the one that killed me that I never got done was I finally got Priscilla to give me rights to do Elvis. And we were actually going to do almost a graphic novel version and upscale it, and it was just, you'll laugh about this, but his last big song before he becomes really famous was Mystery Train, and he was going to be riding the Mystery Train, and this was the sort of aesthetic that was going to happen, and in that train, and there are pictures of him reading comic books, so we're going to have him thinking about his career and where he's been in this sort of mystical train ride and everything. So it failed miserably. I mean, it was. And there had been one other group, I forget, it was a small independent guy that did rock and roll comic books, but he didn't get licenses, he didn't get permission. He was murdered.
Oh my!
And I don't want to say that that's why, but the rumor's always been,
Sure.
because that has happened in this industry. I mean, it does happen that people that step over certain lines years ago put out records they don't have rights to, and do it 2 or 3 times, and suddenly they don't walk so good anymore, things like that. So, so we did a lot of book reviews, and we had Tommy James, and Tommy worked for Morris Levy, and who was probably not only one of the worst of the gangsters, he's one of the biggest. He's like 6'4", and he's very intimidating. I never met him, but Tommy wrote a book called Me, the Mob, and the Music, and we booked him in for like 6 or 7 months later, and the way we advertised it, Tommy says he'll be here if he's still alive. So it's it went hand in hand. It was we did hip hop comics. I did Anthrax. There are just certain people certain artists that love that stuff. I mean, you can understand why it's very close to it. And I think Gene Simmons doing the Kiss comic as early as '79 or '80 when they had the first one come out probably made a lot of these guys think, boy, if I can be a rock star, maybe I can be like Kiss. I can be immortalized in a comic book by Marvel. So.
But that was as a youth, that was one of your things. You loved comic books.
Oh yeah, no, I had thousands of comics which were stolen about 3 years ago.
Oh.
They were I was in between houses, and they were in a warehouse, and somebody targeted the comics. Fortunately, the records were there, which would have hurt me even worse, because as much as I liked the comic books, and my wife was thrilled. Because we got some insurance money off the comic books.
Oh, I see, yeah.
She'd have to deal with that shit.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I still have some comic books. Well, I've got about 100 maybe. They're in pretty good shape.
Well, that's even better if they're in good shape. That's.
I'll have to send you a picture.
Yeah, I'll let you know what you got there.
So as a little kid, you just love comic books and you love rock and roll, right? Those
3
two
things: movies, comic books, and rock and roll.
And movies, okay.
None of which, growing up in the 40s and 50s and 60s, is something you're supposed to do, because you come out of a little town with parents, and one of them never went to high school, and you're supposed to go to college, and I always kid, the first word you learn is college, and the second word you learn is scholarship. I mean, that's just the world you lived in, and the fact that you were going to go do something. Well, you came out of a family that sort of eased the way for you, but never occurred to me that you could actually go do something like this. And it wasn't until I was in mergers and acquisitions. I got my MBA and my law degree, and I did finance. I never wanted to be a lawyer. I learned that in law school. I realized this is not a good idea for me, and so
I just want to be in show business.
Well, yeah. Well, see, that's the funny thing is I thought about that, and I pissed off the guy that taught corporations at Cornell's. Had written the Harry Hand. He had written the textbook, and he'd written the horn book, and he came in every day in a 3-piece suit, and he read from his textbook. And this is silly. I'm not going to that class. And I didn't. And he called me in and said he was very disappointed in me. And I said, I'm very disappointed in you. In fact, when he wasn't there, he'd have somebody else read from his book. and I, you know, I had grounds to be sort of upset about this. And so what I didn't know was he was the guy that taught IP, intellectual properties, which is what I knew I needed to take if I was going to try to sort of go over into that world. So, you know, and then I got into mergers and acquisitions, but I never thought about, you know, I twice my company got bought, and they don't need a merger and acquisition guy. When you get bought, they shoot the lawyers first, and then they shoot the M&A guys. And I lost my job, and this is a long story, but I lost my job, walked out on my practice wife, and had no place to live, and a bartender gave me a place to live that I was telling the story. I was in my cups, and I lived with him for a year, and in the meantime, one of the headhunters I knew said, you got all these comic books, you ought to be at Marvel. I went, yeah.
Yeah.
But I
it's
never,
on my list.
Yeah.
same thing happened at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame,
Yeah.
and that I was still doing consulting in New York for Perlman, and one of my fraternity brothers, there's another Deke story. He lives in Pittsburgh, and he called me one morning. He said, I just saw your next job. I said, where? He said, the Wall Street Journal. I said, I read the Journal this morning. And he said, when it was Tuesday, when all the jobs used to be on Tuesday. Right. And I said, I was in there looking for something. And no, and he said, no, it's a human interest story right above the ad section. Well, he had a 3-star in Pittsburgh, and I had like a 2-star. So I had an earlier edition that didn't have the story, and it was about the fact that they had gone through 7 or 8 directors at the Rock Hall, and they needed a new one. And I said, yeah, that's sort of like Marvel. Yeah, that's a good idea. But my point being that these are, you know, still times, there was still a residual effect of the fact that I grew up with like I did, with the parents saying you got to have a job, you got to keep your job, you got to do screws. So I always loved it, and you would have thought I would have chased it, but no, it wasn't. I mean, he was so lucky to be around that and see how it works, and that be legitimized by who your family was. You know?
Yeah, my dad was the one that encouraged me to go to law school, because he'd been around lawyers that were not music based and oriented. He always thought, you know, you should be a lawyer in the music industry because you know music, and then you can apply that. And then the other thing, great advice he gave me a lot of great advice, but 2 that I remember, like one of those things was like, and then if you ever have you're doing it and you have any questions, just pull up your shirt and go, fuck self-doubt. You know, which was some of the best advice.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Some of the best advice I ever got, and you know, and yeah, just, you know, and then he was like, just be a lawyer that gets deals done. Every lawyer tells me how not to do something, which I get. Be the lawyer that tells me, well, here's what we can do. So
I used to have these young guys, because they find out whether it's Marvel or whether it's the Rock Hall, about particularly in music. And I had a friend that he'd started, I forget which one of the big touring groups, one of those ones, the punk or the ones that's still going, and he was very successful, and he was there when it started, and he wanted to go get his MBA, and I said, that'd be nice for you to know finance, but I won't tell you, if you're smart, you'll go get your law degree. I mean, MBAs aren't disregarded, but I don't know the music business doesn't usually look at that as really a great asset. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting, but the law degree,
for the 5 guys in the finance department, but for everybody else, the law degree.
Yeah, they make things happen. They really do.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't practiced for years, but I use it every day.
Yeah,
that skill every day.
I remember, you know, my dad was a you know, general business guy, but his advice or concept was to me once, he said, you know what, if you can sell, you can do anything. So he always wanted to hire salesmen for whatever, you know, a good salesman. He'd bring him on for whatever he needed.
Right,
you know?
I love that.
Yeah. The highest paid people in the world are salesmen overall when you get down, if you got that skill set.
Yeah. So let's talk about Tim for a little bit. I mean, it must be crazy. You know what I was thinking, reading about him a little bit, is that, remember Howard Stern used to call himself the king of all media? I think Tim's got a better claim, better title than that claim.
I would think Tim's done probably be a little bit more in different media.
Books, movies. He's written books.
He has.
Yeah.
#1 New York Times bestseller books.
Yeah. So
serious. He's done some fun books. We've done some serious books.
Yeah. So does he just have a broad? Is that just a way of branding himself, or is that just those are his interests? You know. He really
honestly, yeah. So obviously Tim Mcgraw. I've worked with him close to 30 years now. He had just gotten married, was going to have a baby. He'd had one unsuccessful album, one big album, and his third album was sort of on the fence of whether it was really, which way was it going to go. And so I started work with him right about that time, and I'd left Sony with the intention to go to work for another record company, and it was just too intriguing because he played me the music that he was working on, and it was like It's Your Love, Where the Green Grass Grows, Just to See You Smile, and I was just blown away by this album. It's just one of the greatest country collections of music I'd ever heard. And so the idea of going from a record company or a law practice and working on 50 acts and just working on one thing was really intriguing. But early on, what I learned from Tim is he has a lot of diverse interests. I mean, he always wanted to be a lawyer. That was always in his mind, like, man, I don't know, maybe I'll be an athlete or a musician, but maybe I'll go to law school. But he's very well read, so people don't realize that very much. Like, he's a pilot, he knows how to fly a plane. He reads historical fiction. So the idea of writing a book was not that unusual. So I think what Tim wanted to do was, just as an artist, just looking for outlets for his creativity and what he could do. And so the idea of going into film and television and books and on, it's just part of in his DNA. It wasn't so much the business people going, hey, you should go do this. People make money doing this. It was really driven by his desire to do it.
Yeah. And
we looked at tons of scripts before he ever chose the first one to do. And
remarkably good at it too.
Exactly, and because I think he wanted to. It wasn't like, let's be a star, go do a movie and make some money. It's like, I really have a desire to do this. And so Friday Night Lights was his first major picture, and it was a fantastic role, and obviously a huge successful movie. So that really launched his movie career to where he was able to. His movies are approaching $1 billion at the box office. That's pretty impressive for. You'd say it's not his day job, but really he's an artist, so I consider it part of his day job. But it may not be our most lucrative part, but it's fun.
So offers must come into him all the time. Is he still like seeking out things? You say, Scott, see if you can get me booked here or there, or does it just come to him, or how does that all work? I don't know.
A little bit of both. Sometimes we'll target things that look interesting that we want to go check out, or sometimes it may be a creative person that we think they're really talented. We want to be in business with them in some way, shape, or form. And of course, we get pitched a lot of things. He's represented by CAA out of LA and Nashville, and so they pitch him a lot of projects as well. So he's got a team of people to help sort of go through all of that. And then I tell everybody, like, what do you really manage? I really just manage Tim Mcgraw's time, because he only has so much time to do any of these things. So what I really have to do is figure out, with his help, what are the things that we need to focus on and pay attention to, because we can't do them all. And you got to let things go.
When he says he wants to write a book, now you got to learn how to be a book publisher too, or learn that business too, right? I mean,
pretty much. That's right. Exactly. You have to be willing to absorb yourself in it. Again, we're just not dabblers. We're really, like, my wife has a little thing. It says I'm either completely uninterested or utterly obsessed. And that's sort of like, we're either, if we're into it, we're into it, and we're gonna go figure it out. And have that passion. So one of the books he did a couple of years ago was a history of the music, the impact of music on the history of America. So he became really good friends with John Meacham, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning historian, and because Tim loves history and John moved here, he got to know him, and so at one point Tim said to John, like, I mean, you've written all these history books, but a little bit of music. But have you ever thought about writing the history of the United States from its music? He said, John got really quiet. He goes, no, but that's a really good idea. I said, I think the next day he had the first half chapter of the book that they needed to write the next day. So, but it came from a genuine place of interest in music and history and how all that came to play.
Title, do you remember?
Songs of America. I'll give you a copy before you read today.
It's one of the areas that people are studying more and more, and you read so much about it, a little off target here, but the fact is there's so many books being written about particularly black culture and black history and black music and blackface and minstrels and things like that. And this all goes back and forth between white and black America, because you have white artists doing it, but then black artists follow them and duplicating it. And then the vocabulary of being used in minstrelsy is taken, black artists take it and use it, and then they change it. So it's, the sources become really crazy, and that language, there's books written about the fact that that language that was used in the 1800s, some of it's still being used in hip hop today. So I mean, and you get all this stuff, it doesn't go away.
Right.
It gets recycled, and sometimes it goes away for a while, and then suddenly it shows up, and there's no obvious way that it came back onto the scene. So
yeah, you'll enjoy the book, because it does get into some of those
Does
kind
it?
of
Yeah.
kind of things, and how, like, it starts with, you know, the early Liberty songs, and basically what we did is they took a poem and put it to a classic British song, so they could rub it in the face of the British, right? And it'd be sort of our call
That's
to
right,
action.
yeah.
But then it really is, it's sort of a fascinating take on it. We're actually getting ready to put out a young adult version later this year. So, but yeah, those, I think, you know, a little far field there. But for Tim, it's like there's just a lot of diversity, a lot of things he wants to do, a lot of things he wants to achieve. And so in that sense, I'm really blessed as a manager to have an artist with that kind of passion and desire.
Do you also get into like on the creative side? So like will you ever say to him, "That song's not quite you," or I mean, is it that how?
I'll give my opinion on
Yeah,
stuff.
okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, he's pretty good at what he does. So,
Yeah. I'd say so.
but he'll ask me his opinion on a few things, and I'll, you know, Tim's at a level where the songs that he gets pitched, he writes some of his stuff, but not a lot. He's very critical on himself. Like, his songs have got to be as good as anybody else's to cut, but the song, like, he gets pitched songs, and he gets pitched really good songs, like, that are going to be hits for other people. It's a question of whether it's a hit for him. It's pretty rare I hear something to go, well, that's terrible. It's like, wow, that's really good. Is it right for you? Is it right for now? Is it right for this project, kind of thing?
But he doesn't have a songwriter that he works with all the time, you know, like Elton John and
No, he's got a few people that he certainly has cut a lot of their songs over the years, but he doesn't care who writes it. You can write it, Doug. If it's a great song.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Well, that underbelly, you know, when Nashville again represents Tin Pan Alley, the way it was back, you know, before these other genres took off, and it doesn't really exist that way. Rock and roll had it with the Brill Building,
Right.
with Carole King and Neil Sedaka and people like that, but not today. It's so all included. I mean, the bands are self, you know, they're singer-songwriters for the most part. They do give songs and pitch songs to other people, but this place down here is remarkable, the number of people that come here to be, well, even like you were talking about Belmont, which I have kids in Ohio that go to Belmont for songwriting.
Right.
I mean,
That's right.
that's, you know, who'd have thunk?
Who would have thought? Yeah, that you could actually do that. So, but you're right, today the industry is so, artists in their little camps, we call them, or just, if you're either in their camp or you're not. And to try to get into somebody's camp, it's really hard, which is why the artist development process is really important, because you're sort of building a camp around that artist that might last for 5 years, 20 years, whatever it might be. But it's super competitive to get into those camps that you're not in, and it's sort of a closed circle, if you will. So if you're an outside writer not associated with that, your song has got to be spectacular to sort of break through that, and somebody go, okay, I need to cut this song regardless.
Yeah, but that's because he's Tim McGraw. I mean, that's you're talking about the super high end guy.
I'm talking about everybody anymore. Even any new artist off the table generally has a group of writers or co-writers, producers. They're sort of a unit, and it's very hard to break into that if you're not part of the development process of that. And I think the labels encourage that kind of thing too.
At the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, did you? And you were there. From what I understand, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it was founded. It was a great idea. Everybody loved it. It was a real cool place. But they weren't running it like a business. And that was what you started to think about.
Well,
We got to run this thing like a business, right?
I guess that's one way of looking. I mean, the thing was that part of the problem was that it wasn't a museum for the longest time. When it was created in '86, people don't understand that the foundation, which is Ahmet Erdogan and Jan Winter and Susan Evans, who was a young lawyer, they created it in mid-'80s, actually bought the name from a guy who had trademarked it. It was remarkable he got it trademarked, but he did. And they bought it from him, and he wanted a TV show, and they hated that idea. And they wanted to keep it sort of closed in. And so they started looking, but people started buying, where's the museum going to be? So not right about the same time the ceremony started, they started saying, where's the museum going to be? So they tried to put it in New York, and they realized they couldn't get any attention there. Plus, as often happens, nobody really wanted to put up the money from the labels. Let's use other people's money. So they basically went out and looked for cities, you know, that would compete. But Cleveland showed up first because of a disc jockey, Norman Knight, who was on the radio in Cleveland, but had been on the radio on New York and had written a book called Rock On in the 70s. It became somewhat famous. This was the story of all the artists, what happened to them. And he went and pitched it, and they basically scruffled the neck, threw him out of the room. But he kept persisting, and so they got it. So they say they're going to build it in '86. They don't build it to '95, and then, like a lot of things, they brought in people that were administrators and people that had no relationship to the art form. I mean, and I'm not bragging. It's just the fact that they people that were convenient in Cleveland, and then they brought in Dennis Berry, who had run an art museum in Cincinnati, who was a great museum guy, but again, wasn't related to music and rock and roll. So I'd like to think what I brought to it was this stupid passion I have that you're not interested in,
Right.
and you go crazy, and it's about, and it is about business. It's about, you know, reducing costs and doing all the things and creating memberships that really work and things like that. So, but it took a long time, and you know, the other issue is that we are in a place called Cleveland, and Cleveland is not a city that for years had much traffic, whether it was enough business traffic or tourist traffic. And so as we recognized, and I learned this, Kyle has actually helped me understand this, it's too bad he's not here today, that what they started to do in Nashville, we were always way ahead of them in attendance. And as Nashville started to explode about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and everything became so Nashville-centric,
Right.
he realized that the real secret was to capture all these people coming to Nashville. There's no way you can, the attendance at the Rock Hall is every 50 states and 100 countries every year. How do you promote or advertise it? You can't.
Right.
Some people make a decision to come to Cleveland, sure, that happens, but not the majority of the people that come there. They're gonna come, but the people that come to Cleveland, I'm in Cleveland, I'm gonna go to the Rock Hall. If you're gonna survive in a fraternity house, particularly if you're lucky enough to get to be the president, boy, you talk about herding cats. I mean, and you don't usually herd them, they just go. But, you know, but it takes you to a point of, you know, you had to stand up in front of these guys, you had to try to get their attention, you had to try to get some points, you try to get things done, you know, and it's one of the first times you ever do that in your life of any responsibility.
You're 19 years old or 20 years old.
Yeah. And you got, our house, the Deke house, was all athletes. You know, we had 150 brothers at one time, and we had 50 or 60 on the football team, and we had basketball players, we had a lot of wrestlers. These are tough son of a bitches, motherfuckers.
We used to wrestle on the floors.
Yeah.
No.
Different kind of wrestling.
But you know, and trying to get those guys to pay attention to you and listen to anything. And I won't pretend that I did it all the time. But just occasionally have a breakthrough. Well, yeah, okay, we can do that sort of thing. So, you know.
We only had 5 or 6 rooms, so it was generally only the officers that lived in that house.
Got it.
Yeah.
There were people that spent the night there, of course, but lived there or didn't go until the morning.
Yeah, there were three doubles, but one of the doubles was usually just reserved for the brother Beta, who got the, you know, so he had the big room.
Right.
And, but still, I mean, you had the same challenges. I mean, we had, not everybody thinks alike in a fraternity, and so trying to get them to, I mean, do you remember any issues you had to deal with when you were brother Beta at Vanderbilt? I mean,
Oh, yes, I do.
Yeah.
I do. So I remember, I think the way it worked, I think you're elected at the end of the junior year, and then you serve sort of your senior year. I think is how the timing went. So it was getting ready to break for summer, and somebody in the class ahead of us was going to get married and wanted to have a party at the Deke house after school closed. So I went to Dean Potter at the time and said, you know, can we keep the house open for a few more days? He's getting married and all this. And he's like, okay, I'll let y'all do that. So it's like, great. So I get back from the summer break, and there's a note in my mailbox to come see Deke Potter. And so I show up to Deke Potter. He was a fantastic man.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, we have a problem. I said, okay, well, what's the problem? He said, well, somebody defecated in a mug and threw it through the window of the Phi-Psi house, which was next door to the Deke house. And so the early lawyer to me was like, okay, but so you had it stayed late. There was a party, and I said, yeah, but that doesn't really prove it was the Dekes that did it. He goes, it was a Deke mug. And I was like,
he was holding that back.
He was holding that back. And I was like, okay, you got me there. He goes, so
Right.
you guys, we were on double secret probation there for a semester to behave ourselves.
There's
So,
a theme
Right.
there because the Dekes in our house, whenever Saturday night happened and they decided to go, we were the only house that had a band every Saturday night. And we were famous for that. And it's the only place in New Jersey you could drink underage legally. You could do the eating clubs at Princeton, but they didn't have bands. And so Rutgers was all men.
okay.
So literally at
Oh.
6 o'clock, girls would start lining up at the door, and there was a legal principle and local principle in place your parents that allowed us, if we signed them in at the door, we are exculpated from liability. And so these girls would show up, and often they'd show up and disappear for 2 or 3 days. The parents would come looking for them. Because I'm not kidding, but when these guys would get on,
We had trouble getting girls to show up at the Deke
Yeah.
house, Nashville.
free beer and a band, you'd be amazed what it'll do. And but getting back to one of the
I hope these are not high school girls. They're talking about college girls. From
no,
other,
they
other
were,
colleges.
they were everything.
Right.
I mean, I don't even want to think about it.
Yeah.
I promise you, I don't want to think about it. But one of the popular things to do is when they, late at night after the party, say 2 or 3 in the morning on Saturday, they go roaming to other houses. Then some of the guys that they either liked a lot or didn't like, depending on how you feel about it, they love to shit in a paper cup and bend the top and then stomp on it underneath their bedroom door.
Right.
And spray it all. That was a very popular thing.
that was a thing back then. We were. I don't know. We were sort of a ragtag group. I think the Dekes were at Vanderbilt. There were everyone sort of had its thing, and it felt like the Dekes were whatever anybody else didn't have. That was Deke.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Huh.
that was my take on it. Like if you were from Nashville, you were a KA or you were an SAE or you were, you know, each fraternity sort of had its niche kind of thing. But the Dekes had no niche was part of what I liked.
Texans all went to Phi Delta, and I remember that. Yeah, there were niches. And
Yeah.
But
Well, that's the strange thing is, you know, growing up outside of Mobile, I actually got they rushed you in high school then, and that was the last thing I wanted to hear about. It just didn't interest me.
Yeah.
And it was a whole different set of people. Fraternity families in Mobile were very different than what I did growing up in the woods in Alabama. So I didn't relate to it, but I didn't have any idea that was Deke. It was in Mobile. It was, even in those days, it was such a big force at the University of Alabama.
still is.
Oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's like it's a train that goes there. Yeah.
That's great.
But other than the leadership aspect of it, what else? I mean, what was your you enjoyed the Deke house, obviously. We made good friends and we had a lot of fun together. I mean, what else?
We did. Oh my gosh, we had a lot of fun. Well, again, because it was a music town. I mean, obviously there was lots of opportunity to go out and see acts and play in bars and stuff. And so it was a lot of fun. The Dekes themselves, we had, I think maybe once a month we'd have a band, maybe a couple of times, but about once a month we'd have a band.
Weren't you social chairman before you became president?
I was secretary.
Secretary. Okay.
Secretary was the stepping stone to my presidency.
Okay.
Do you remember what you paid for bands in those days?
It was like $150 maybe.
We used to talk
3 or
about.
4.
People would say, "Who you got this week?" I said, "Cosmo and the Deltones." They're $40,
Yeah.
$30, $40.
Yeah, we would have. That's why we probably did it once a month.
Yeah, that's it.
And then it was
Right.
like, how much money do we have for the kegs of beer? It was fun. The great thing about being secretary was, during the meetings, you held the book and you took the notes. And what I realized from reading the book was the notes didn't have to reflect anything that was going on. it was really a creative writing opportunity.
It was hilarious.
And so it was like one of those great things where you could just, if somebody said something, you could just start making up whatever you wanted to do. I don't know, those books are probably long since gone, but that was a lot of fun.
They were funny, and then I do remember that. And then Leighton took over. I think Leighton was secretary after you, and his minutes were pretty funny too. But I was doing a little mini history project over at the archives, the Vanderbilt archives, and they've got minute books from way back in the teens, the 19-teens. And even back then, they were hilarious. Just goofing on somebody for getting drunk or something like that.
When I got the gig, I thought, man, this is like really important, right? And then I'm reading this going, not exactly, but this is fun. So, so it was fun. It was fun to do that. I think our biggest challenge was always trying to be able to make the house profitable enough to pay for food, to have meals, and we had a lot of shepherd's pie, and then we would have more shepherd's pie, and shepherd's pie again.
But again, you're 19 years old, you're running a little business. I mean, your business was bigger because our house wasn't as big, but you probably had a $100,000 budget or something like that.
Yeah, I don't even remember how big.
Maybe more, but you're running a small business, and I think we all learned a lot from that. But